Have you ever done something kind for a stranger, not expecting anything in return? Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion ripple out further than we could ever imagine. What if one quiet moment of kindness changed everything? Stay with us. This story will warm your heart. The bell above the diner's door jingled softly, but nobody looked up. It was early, too early for anything interesting. A few regulars hunched over their coffee, muttering about weather and politics, their faces tucked into newspapers like shields. Miss Lila wiped down the counter with the same worn rag she'd used 1,000 times, her hands moving on instinct. She knew every crack in the vinyl booths, every flicker of the neon open sign struggling against the gray morning fog. This place wasn't fancy. It was a forgotten pocket on the edge of town, where time moved slower and kindness was currency you gave away, expecting nothing back. That's when she saw him, the boy, small, alone. So still, he might have been a shadow if it weren't for the faint scrape of his sneakers on the tile floor. His clothes were too thin for the chilly morning air. A faded t-shirt with a cartoon character half erased by time, jeans frayed at the knees. No jacket, no backpack, no adult trailing behind. Just him and those eyes. They were wide, dark, and hollow, like twin wells too deep for a child to carry. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there by the door, as if unsure whether he was allowed to cross the threshold. Lila's heart squeezed tight in her chest. She dropped the rag, rounded the counter, and knelt in front of him so they were eye to eye. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice soft as a lullaby. "You hungry?" The boy didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't move, but his eyes flicked briefly to the counter, where a plate of half-eaten pancakes sat cooling. That was enough. Miss Lila stood, moving with purpose now. She slid into the kitchen, ignoring the curious glances from the old-timers, nursing their third cups of coffee. Within minutes, she returned, a steaming plate of fresh pancakes in one hand, a glass of cold milk in the other. She placed them carefully on the corner booth, the one closest to the window, where the sun might eventually find him. "Go on, sugar," she coaxed, stepping back to give him space. The boy hesitated only a second before slipping into the booth like a whisper. He picked up the fork with small, shaking hands and began to eat. Slow at first, then faster, like someone afraid the food might vanish if he took too long. Lila didn't ask questions, didn't press him for a name or a story. She simply brought a small jar of syrup, topped off his milk when he wasn't looking, and sat back behind the counter where she could keep a quiet watch. In her heart, she knew. Some hurts ran too deep for words. Sometimes what a soul needed wasn't interrogation. It was sanctuary. As the boy ate, a strange stillness settled over the diner, as if the whole world paused to witness one small act of grace. No one noticed the storm that was coming. Not yet. The next morning he came back. Same time, same quiet creak of the door. Same wide, haunted eyes. Miss Lila had just finished flipping the chairs down from the tables when she saw him standing there again, a ghost in sneakers. This time she didn't wait. She simply smiled, warm, easy, and gestured to the same booth by the window. The boy slid into the seat without a sound. No hesitation, no questions. Within minutes, a fresh plate of pancakes landed in front of him, along with a taller glass of milk. A small apple appeared too, polished to a shine. Miss Lila added it without a word, just a wink. The boy blinked, almost like he wasn't used to someone being gentle. Day after day, the ritual repeated. Morning mist still clung to the streets when he arrived, always alone, his footsteps small but steady. Miss Lila would greet him with a smile, sometimes a soft hum of an old gospel tune under her breath. She started packing him a sandwich each morning too, slipping it into a brown paper bag and setting it at the edge of the table. He never asked for it, never reached for it in front of her. But each day the bag would be gone when she turned her back. The regulars noticed. Old Mr. Jenkins, who occupied the corner booth with his bitter coffee and sharper tongue, grunted one morning. "You're just feeding strays now, Lila?" She didn't answer him. She wiped down the counter a little harder, like she could scrub the ignorance off the world. Behind her, Sally May, the young waitress with dreams bigger than this dusty town, whispered, "You're gonna get in trouble, Miss Lila." Ain't you worried? Lila just smiled, that same patient, secret smile. Child, doing the right thing ain't never been about keeping out of trouble. Still, she kept her eyes open. The boy wore the same clothes every day. No fresh bruises, but something unseen seemed broken in him, delicate and raw. He never flinched when someone raised their voice across the diner, but he always watched the door, like he expected someone, or something, to come dragging him back. Leela didn't push him. She didn't demand his story like some of the others might have. She didn't pepper him with questions about parents or police or where he laid his head at night. Deep down, she figured if the boy needed to speak, he would, when he was ready. Until then, pancakes would do the talking. And so, in that little diner where the neon light buzzed and the coffee never quite tasted right, a silent bond formed. Fragile, unseen, but stronger than steel. Neither of them knew it yet, but something was shifting, something bigger than either of them could see. Out there, beyond the fogged windows, the wheels of fate were already turning, and soon kindness, simple, quiet, stubborn kindness, was going to collide with power in a way that would change both their lives forever. It was a Tuesday, the kind of morning where the sky hung low and heavy, clouds bruised purple with the threat of rain. Miss Lila moved through the diner like always, brewing coffee, flipping special signs, humming under her breath. The boy was there, tucked into his booth by the window, small hands wrapped around his glass of milk like it was an anchor holding him steady. Then the ground seemed to hum. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration in the bones. Something heavy, something coming. The bell above the door didn't jingle this time. Instead, every head in the diner turned toward the windows as the parking lot filled with the deep, low growl of engines. 4 black SUVs rolled up in a perfect formation, their tinted windows flashing like obsidian mirrors under the dull morning light. The vehicles stopped in sync, tires crunching over loose gravel, a choreography too precise to be anything but deliberate. Inside, the diner went still. Old Mr. Jenkins lowered his newspaper for the first time in 15 years. Sally Mae froze mid-pour, coffee spilling over the rim of a cup, unnoticed. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow, its tired blades catching the thickening air. Miss Lila's hand tightened around the coffee pot. The doors of the SUVs swung open all at once. Men in dark suits stepped out, clean, sharp, and cold as winter steel. Earpieces curled behind their ears. Dark glasses hid their eyes. Their movements were smooth, efficient, rehearsed. A few customers gathered their things and hurried out the side door without paying. Miss Lila stood her ground. She glanced once at the boy, instinctively moving to shield him with her body, even though she didn't fully understand why. That's when she saw it. One of the men stepped aside. And there he was, the boy. But not the boy she'd been feeding. This boy wore new clothes, dark jeans, spotless sneakers, a crisp jacket that probably cost more than her whole week's pay. His hair was neatly combed, his cheeks pink from a recent bath. He looked healthier, cleaner, but somehow smaller too. Like he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. His eyes, though, his eyes found hers. And in that single glance, Miss Lila knew. It was him, her boy, the one who ate pancakes like it hurt, the one who watched the door with a heart heavy in his chest. Now he was standing among men who moved like bodyguards and smelled like money and authority. Yet in that sea of suits and power, his gaze reached for her. Miss Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. One of the suited men broke away from the group and started toward her, his polished shoes clicking on the tile, his face an unreadable mask. Around them, the diner shrank into silence, the world narrowing down to one woman, one child, and a secret big enough to tear the sky open. Something was about to happen. Something that would flip her quiet life upside down forever. The man who approached Miss Lila moved like he owned the ground under his feet. He wasn't tall, not exactly, but he carried himself with a weight that made him seem bigger than life. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored sharp enough to slice bread, and his black tie sat perfect against his crisp white shirt. Everything about him said power, control, precision. Yet when he stopped in front of her counter, he removed his sunglasses. A simple gesture. And in that moment, something softened. His eyes were brown, surprisingly warm, tired maybe, but not cruel. He nodded once, a small bow of respect. "Miss Lila?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, practiced. Behind her, Sally Mae fumbled a stack of plates with a loud clatter. But Lila didn't flinch. She stood tall, towel still slung over her shoulder, chin tilted up just slightly, the way a woman does when life's tried to break her too many times, but never quite managed. "That's me," she said steady. The man smiled. Not a grin, but a solemn thing, like he was grateful just to be standing here. "My name is Mr. Carter," he said. "On behalf of some very grateful people, I came to thank you." Lila glanced past him to where the boy stood between two bodyguards. His small fingers fidgeted with the hem of his jacket, but his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, never left her. "I didn't do anything special," Lila said carefully, her instincts prickling. "I just fed a hungry child." Mr. Carter's smile deepened, touched by something that almost looked like sorrow. "Sometimes," he said, "the simplest acts echo the loudest." The other customers, what few hadn't fled, pretended not to listen, but the diner was practically vibrating with tension. Coffee cups frozen midair, forks paused halfway to mouths. Mr. Carter lowered his voice. "You didn't ask who he was. You didn't call the authorities. You didn't try to make him explain the pain he carried." He leaned in just slightly as if sharing a secret. "You gave him what no one else had, Miss Lila. Dignity." Lila's throat tightened. She didn't know the boy's story, didn't know what shadows chased him or who he had left behind. But standing there, facing a man who clearly knew far more than he said, she understood something. This wasn't about pancakes and milk anymore. This was bigger, deeper, and whatever it was coming at her life fast. Mr. Carter reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Thick, weighty. He placed it gently on the counter between them, like someone setting down a live wire. "My employer would like to speak with you," he said, "privately." Outside, the SUVs waited with their engines idling, black and hungry against the gray morning. The diner's door creaked in the rising wind. Miss Lila stared at the envelope, then at the boy, then back at the man who carried secrets like weapons. Whatever choice she made next, there was no going back. For a long moment, Miss Lila just stood there, the weight of the envelope pressing down on the worn Formica counter like a stone. She wasn't a fool. She knew danger when she saw it, and opportunity too. Sometimes they wore the same suit. Finally, with slow, deliberate fingers, she picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly. Waiting. She glanced once more at the boy, her boy, and something passed between them. Trust, gratitude, fear. She slipped the envelope open. Inside was a single card, thick as velvet. On it, embossed in clean, heavy letters, were 3 words: Trayson Alexander III. Miss Lila's breath caught in her chest. The name rang through her memory like a bell. Trayson Alexander III, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the country. The Alexanders had their hands in everything: tech, real estate, politics. A dynasty built over 3 generations, whispered about in the kind of circles Miss Lila had only ever glimpsed from the wrong side of velvet ropes. She stared at the boy again, truly seeing him now. Trayson. This wasn't just some lost child from a broken home. This was a missing heir. A boy whose face had once flickered across late-night news cycles, tucked between war updates and stock market crashes. A whispered mystery. Kidnapped at 5 years old. No leads, no ransom. Family devastated. Until now, until her diner, until her booth by the window. She looked back at Mr. Carter, her voice rough around the edges. "He's... that Trayson?" Mr. Carter gave a small grim nod. "He was taken," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Hidden. Moved." Heard his mouth tightened. "For years." Lila's hands curled around the edge of the counter to steady herself. She didn't need details. She could see the shadows clinging to the boy like a second skin. She could feel the long nights he must have survived, the silences he had learned to carry like armor. "What happens to him now?" she asked, her voice fierce and soft all at once. Mr. Carter's expression shifted, something vulnerable flashing beneath his polished exterior. "He's going home," he said, "and it's because of you." Miss Lila felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet, the kid she fed out of pure instinct. The boy she protected with nothing more than pancakes and kindness was someone the world had been desperately searching for. Someone important. But to her, he wasn't a headline. He wasn't a prize. He was just a boy who needed someone to see him, to feed him without questions, to treat him like he mattered even when he couldn't say a word. Mr. Carter cleared his throat and straightened his tie, slipping professional coolness back over the raw moment. "My employer," he said carefully, "wishes to express their gratitude in person. It's significant." Miss Lila looked down at her hands, strong, calloused, steady, then back at the boy. Maybe this was fate. Maybe it was just an accident of timing. But either way, her life was about to change. The question was she ready? The ride to the meeting was short, but it felt like a lifetime. Miss Lila sat in the back seat of the lead SUV, the leather soft and too clean, the windows tinted so dark it was like riding through a tunnel. Mr. Carter sat beside her, silent and composed. Across from her, Trayson, the boy she still thought of simply as her boy, sat buckled in, small and fragile looking, despite the crisp jacket and spotless sneakers. He kept glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Miss Lila smiled once, soft, reassuring, and the boy leaned back, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. The convoy pulled through tall iron gates into a sprawling estate that looked like something out of a movie. Endless green lawns, stone fountains, and a house so large it could have been its own town. As they stepped out, a wave of staff members in black suits and earpieces rushed forward, coordinating movements like a well-oiled machine. But at the top of the grand staircase, standing rigid and still like statues carved from grief, were two figures, a man and a woman, Trayson's parents. Miss Lila could see them clearly now. Not the polished, perfect versions from magazine covers, but the real ones. The man's face was worn with lines that came from fear, not age. The woman gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles were white, as if the only thing holding her upright was pure will. And when their eyes found Trayson, the air between them cracked open. The woman gasped, stumbling forward a step, hand flying to her mouth. The man took one faltering step, then another, like a man crossing a battlefield littered with unseen mines. Trayson froze for a heartbeat. Then he ran. The boy who had crept into the diner with shoulders bowed by invisible chains, the boy who barely spoke or smiled, ran straight into his mother's arms. The sound that tore from her throat was half sob, half laughter, something so raw it cut through the crisp, manicured perfection of the estate like a storm. She fell to her knees, clutching him so tightly it was a wonder he could breathe, pressing kisses to his forehead, his hair, his cheeks. The man dropped down beside them, arms wrapping around both, burying his face in his son's small shoulder. Miss Lila stood at the bottom of the steps, her heart hammering in her chest, feeling like an intruder on something too sacred for words. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. This moment wasn't hers. It belonged to them, to the family that had been shattered and now miraculously stitched back together by a thread she'd never even realized she was holding. Mr. Carter touched her elbow gently, guiding her forward. "They want to thank you properly," he murmured. Lila hesitated. She wasn't sure she belonged in a place like this, wrapped in marble and money. She wasn't sure she ever would. But then Trayson turned in his mother's arms, reaching one small hand toward her. Wordless, sure. And just like that, Miss Lila climbed the steps, toward a future she could barely imagine. Inside the estate, the walls whispered wealth. Polished wood, towering chandeliers, art that probably had its own bodyguards. But Miss Lila barely noticed. All her focus was on Trison, nestled safely between his parents now, but still looking back at her, his hand occasionally reaching to make sure she hadn't vanished like a dream. They led her into a sunlit room lined with windows overlooking manicured gardens. Staff melted away into the background, leaving just the Alexanders, Mr. Carter, Trayson, and Miss Lila. The boy's mother, Eleanor Alexander, approached first. Her eyes, still red-rimmed from crying, shone with a kind of fierce gratitude that words could never contain. "Miss Lila," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "there are no words for what you've given us." She reached out, gripping Lila's hand in both of hers. "You didn't know who he was. You didn't ask for anything. You just cared. When the world forgot him, you remembered he mattered." Tears welled up again in Eleanor's eyes, but she fought them down with a shaky breath. Her husband, Marcus Alexander, stepped forward next. Taller, a little more reserved, but no less moved. "We are indebted to you," he said, his voice thick. "And we want to offer you something. Something more than just words." Mr. Carter stepped up, carrying a simple leather folder. He opened it carefully and slid it across the glass coffee table toward Lila. Inside was a deed, a property. Not just any property, a piece of land and a brand new building under construction. Miss Lila blinked, trying to process. Marcus smiled gently. "It's yours," he said. "A brand new diner. Bigger, better. Fully funded, fully staffed if you want it. Or you can run it yourself. It's up to you." Eleanor added softly, "You always gave more than you had. We want you to never have to worry again." Lila's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She looked at the papers, the clean lines of her name typed at the bottom, the value of it all so staggering she couldn't even grasp it fully. But it wasn't just the building. It was freedom. It was security. It was home. A home she could share with everyone who ever wandered in hungry and hurting, the way Trayson once did. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not thank you, not no, not yes. Just a thick knot of emotion she couldn't untangle. Trayson broke the silence. He slipped out of his mother's arms and crossed the room, climbing awkwardly into Miss Lila's lap like he had done in the diner booth. No hesitation, no fear. He tucked his head against her shoulder, safe and certain. And that, more than the papers, more than the money, was the real gift. The boy she had saved had come back to save her, too. Miss Lila wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, as if anchoring them both to this new, impossible world. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, good things could find people like her after all. 6 months later, the morning sun spilled golden light across a brand new neon sign. Lila's Place, where everyone's family. The grand opening was packed. The smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon floated through the air. Music played from a small live band set up under a white tent. Kids darted between tables with balloons in hand. And neighbors, the old, the young, the lonely, the hopeful, flooded the patio and sidewalks. Miss Lila stood at the front door, wearing a brand new apron stitched with her name across the chest, beaming like she was holding the sun itself in her hands. The diner was everything she could have dreamed of. Wide booths, a shining counter, a kitchen big enough for a real crew. But it still felt right, still felt hers. Inside, on the very first booth by the window, Trayson sat proudly with his parents, swinging his legs beneath the table, a plate piled high with pancakes in front of him. He waved at her, big, dramatic, his whole face lit up with joy. And Miss Lila laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from the deep, unbroken part of your soul. Cameras flashed from local news crews. Curious reporters buzzed at the edges, whispering about the woman who saved the missing heir, about the Alexander's anonymous donation, about miracles and mysteries. But Lila didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the single mom counting out change with shaking hands, and the free meal voucher she slipped into her palm. She cared about the old man who came in every morning and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu just for someone to talk to. She cared about Trayson laughing with his mouth full, like he'd never known pain. This place, her place, wasn't just a diner. It was a second chance for everyone. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus and Eleanor Alexander made their way to the counter, Trayson tugging them forward. Marcus extended a hand, warm and genuine. "We owe you everything." Lila shook her head, smiling gently. "You don't owe me a thing," she said. "I just did what was right." Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion. She pressed something small into Lila's hand, a delicate gold locket, engraved simply, "Kindness changes everything." Lila's fingers closed around it, her throat tightening. Trayson hugged her tight around the waist, surprising her with his strength. She ruffled his hair, blinking back tears. As the sun began to set, casting the diner in hues of pink and gold, Miss Lila stood at the threshold of her brand-new world, the locket warm against her chest, her heart fuller than it had ever been. Not every act of kindness changes the world, but sometimes, just sometimes, and it does. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the world comes back to thank you. In a world that can sometimes feel too fast and too cold, it's the simple acts of kindness that remind us of our shared humanity. Miss Lila's story shows us that no gesture is ever too small, and that sometimes a little love is all it takes to change a life.